Yo and welcome to my next tutorial where we're going to have a look on how to shade Groom here inside of Houdini and Solaris with RenderMan and Llama. So we of course start here with the collect node with a Llama surface node, everything on default, and we are using the Llama hair Geng node. So this node is basically our hair shader, our hair material that we are going to alter the inputs with different colors. So the first thing we want to do is we want to turn off remap TT colors. So otherwise this is going to remap our melanin values, which we don't want. Quick overview of all the fancy settings we have here. So the primary roughness is basically, of course, the first specular highlight we're getting, which is usually the main one, which is the bit more sharper one. Then we do have the transmit roughness, which is when the light ray enters the hair, that we do have internal bounces as well. How rough is it basically inside there? We do have the secondary roughness, which is a slightly offset specular highlight within on the hair, and we have the azimuthal roughness, which is somewhat a bit like anisotropy, which is going around the hair. So it's not going from top to bottom; it's more going on the horizontal way. How rough basically this highlight is in the horizontal way. Then of course we also have here some settings where we can cheat a bit with change the gains of that, but I recommend to not do that. So as I already initially said, we want to use the melanin values. Why we want to use the melanin values and not a texture or some constant colors? The reason is, first of all, we want to try to be as realistic as possible, so therefore we want to utilize melanin values and not try to color pick some values or color grade our texture to oblivion to maybe at some point nail the hair color we want to have to match our reference or the look we want. Furthermore, we also have a few very cool settings here in this node that we can utilize to get a bit more of an organic feeling right away. So again, we want to use the melanin value because it's physically accurate, it's physically based, and it will give us the correct result right away. So we want to connect here the result TT into the color TT input, and then we can actually fire up here the IPR and see what we get. So we see here we get a pretty blonde result, and that actually is because we do have here quite a bit of redness. Here with that, of course, quite self-explanatory, we can introduce some redness into the hair. Let's have it here on a more lower setting. And then we have the melanin. So the melanin is basically the pigment within your hair that is determined, or it is telling how bright or how dark your hair will be. So the lower the value, the whiter it will get, and the higher the value, the darker it will get. So yeah, I think it's pretty straightforward. Let's get to something darker, brighter I mean. So one thing that I want to mention is, for example, I've noticed on Asian people, they seem to have quite dark hairs. But when the sun hits in the right angle, you actually can see that they do have quite a bit of a red glow to it. And this is, for example, what I mean. You will get here the correct values, the correct color values for the hair with the melanin right away to, for example, mimic something like that. While when you try to use a color constant, you really have to try to get the correct color value to mimic this effect, for example. So yeah, that being said, we do have now set here our hair color. Let's make it a bit brighter that we can actually see a bit more here for the tutorial's sake. So we do have here melanin randomize. It's not doing anything, and that's because we don't have set the attribute that it needs for that. So we have here the random setup, and here it actually looks for a primvar. RenderMan or your Groom needs to have the ID attribute, and RenderMan, I'm not sure if actually RenderMan is applying that per default. I just know RenderMan is applying that, is applying a UV per default. But if you have it on your Groom, then it's as easy as type in here ID, press enter, and then you will get it. So you will also get here the stray color, which we can quickly for a moment put to 0. And let's have a look here on our albedo to what we get. So as you can see here, we get here already melanin randomize going on, which is going crazy. So when we turn it off, we have just a constant on all of the hairs. And when we introduce a bit, we will get a bit, random melanin values here that are maybe going a bit darker or maybe a bit brighter, which is going to help a lot for an organic feeling. So for the stray color, this are basically just some hairs that is going to pick it and is going to give them a melanin value you're setting here. So we can, for example, say, hey, we will make it quite dark, and then stray density, make it very low. We introduce now some of the black hairs, we go crazy. We have a lot of black hairs and just a few of the blonde hairs. So I recommend keep it more on the lower side. Keep the values somewhat on a more conservative thing to not have too crazy values. If we want to introduce some kind of like salt and pepper looks, we can do that in a different way where we maybe have a bit more fine control over that. So let's say we are happy with that. Let's quickly have a look here how it looks like in full shaded. I say that looks pretty cool. So let's say we want to have some areas that are this blonde color and some others that are dark. For example, when you have a creature that has a specific pattern on the fur, and some of the patterns they are dark, some of the other ones they are bright. We can actually do that very easily. So in my case, I need first of all the manifold node to pick up the UVs from my model. So the manifold 2D, I set it here to ST because that's the UV set I'm working with. And then let's get here a fractal. And then we also want to have a spline to control the contrast of it. So the result from that is going in here. That result is going into the input. And this will be then our mask. So now let's say this is where we want to have our bright spots. And then we also want to have a dark spot. Let's go in here, hair color. Now we know we want to have darker hair. That means we want to have more melanin. Now we want to blend them together. And for that, we can actually use a layered blend node here. Get that. Maybe name that dark and bright. So get them here. Get this guy here, that one, and then hook the soldier boy up here to our material. Now one is just overriding the other, but as soon as we plug in here our mask, we will start getting here some values. And first of all, I want to have a bit more contrast in my mask here, so let's get here a bit more contrast in. So in your case, this will probably be then a mask you have painted in your texturing package. Or maybe you're doing it procedural like I do here. That's up to you. Depends on what your goal is to achieve. And as we can see, we now get some areas that are the blonde, some areas that are the dark. We can then of course here change the frequency to get the desired look we want. This is how you can mask areas based on your model. Now let's say we want to mask the hair based from the root to the tip. It's actually quite easy. For that we can, let's see here, that's the variable, it's that guy, it's my little cheat sheet there. And we set it here to UV and float. So randomizing actually, as I said, it's applying per default already UVs to your splines, which means it's going to map them from 0 to 1. And we can utilize here the green channel, with a spline again, actually this input, to mask the root to tip. Now let's say we don't want to mask them like that. Now let's say we want to mask them from root to tip. We can use here the 2 blend, not to have the full big guy here. Hook them up like that. Get that one. Don't need this one anymore. Now again, one is overriding the other. Now we can get here the float, put it here into the mask. Now as we can see, something is happening. Let's have a look here in the albedo. We see already we have now dark roots and bright tips. We have full control over that now by changing here the spline. We could, for example, change here a bit the fall off, so it gets a bit more, so it's a bit softer, and then it fades over. Or we can say, hey, we want to have the darker root for a bit longer. This one, the position, then we can change that. This way we have actually full control over the root to tip. Of course, we can also use here those values here for the darken roots, darken slopes to do that, but I think with that way we can actually have a bit of final control over it, and we also can control the mask itself. So we could combine it, for example, with an area mask to say, hey, only in certain areas we have a fall off that is a bit more aggressive, and in some other areas there the fall off is a bit softer. We can also introduce some random hairs that are not going to follow this root to tip pattern here. So we do have more control if we are doing that manually. That already brought me to the point how we can get some more random masks, and my workflow in that case is the Pixar Vary. So the Pixar Vary is actually a pretty cool node where we can feed in a primvar here or an attribute, whatever. In my case it's the primvar because we want to utilize the ID attribute again. And then what I do is I just give it here a random color. Really, we can have a look what this guy is doing. Hook it up, Pixar constant, and then we hook the Pixar constant up here to our collect. Then we can see what we get here. So just pick here a random color, it really doesn't matter. And then we go here from the center. It's very important that we go from the center to plus or minus. That we are going here with a different hue, different saturation, different luminance, different gamma, that we get a very random color here. And from that, then we can go in here with a spline, hook this guy up here into the float, or we can also, this now would just pick the red of it if you want to have that a bit nicer. Then we get that. I think it's take the average or something like that. Then we probably get the better result here to that one. And now we can, first of all, yeah, we just could crank up the contrast here to only get a few hairs, or we could also isolate some values in between. Since we now have very random values that are going from 0 to 1, we could also pick stuff in between. This is totally possible. So with the spline, we have full control over whatever we want. So it's actually pretty handy. And then let's say we want to combine those two together. For that, we can use a blend again. Hook this guy up here. So we could either use a multiply, or we can also just use the black input here. Then we can also control that like that. So let's see here. Let's say we want to have a bit less of that. Now we see we get way more or less. We have, yeah, again, a lot of control over that. And then this will be then of course our output here into this mask, and then we get a nicely random hair shading here. So let's say this is all cool and nice, but we want to use a color ramp to drive our root to tip coloring, because maybe you want to do something very fancy. We can actually do that as well. So I've deleted it already, so I don't have a cheat sheet. So let's see if I can come up with that again. So we want to have the ramp, and we have that here with the color, and then we can use the variable again. And we want to use the green because we already know the green is the UV, which is going from 0 to 1. We put it here into the spline map. And then this guy will be our color. And now we can use one of those and put it into the dye color here. So like that. So this way we have still the correct hair melanin basically below. And then we can apply some dyed hair colors to it. It does matter what your hair color is underneath, which I found, yeah, maybe a bit annoying to work with, but I think probably it makes sense. But yeah, just maybe have it a bit on a different side here. If you would have some areas where, for example, the dyed hair color is not so present anymore, I would just mask it out again with a spline, just as I did here with the UV, and then define where you have certain kind of like natural hair color again, and where do you have the colored hair again. Okay, so now we can go in here and now we can go very funky. So we can say, hey, here we have a green root, and then we do have a blue tip, or yeah, purple. Then it's going all the way through. We can say, hey, look, here in between we want to have a different color. So here it's going into red. Now we can see we go very funky from a green source here to a purpley tip color here, and then let's go. The beauty, yeah, it looks actually a bit ass. So let's have a look. Why does it look ass? Dye color we have plugged in. Hair color we probably want to go now lower. Now we get, yeah, see that's what I mean. I find it a bit odd. Best go with the melanin here to 0, that you get the 100% of the dye color. That actually to me it doesn't make so much sense. I also don't know everything. If someone knows why it's like that, feel free to let me know in the comments. But other than that, so that's how you can actually also get some color ramps along your hairs that you then, as I said, you could totally mix that together then with natural hairs. Maybe some areas they have the funky hair color, some areas they don't have that. That's then totally up to you. As you can see, it's actually not that crazy as long as you know which technique is doing what. So as a short summary, if you want to have a more area-based workflow, then you want to have the UVs, and then you can use a spline to color correct maybe the mask a bit, then use a blend node to isolate those areas. If you want to have a root to tip mask, then you can just use the UV, just the green channel there, where you pick up here the variable, the UV prim var, and then you can mask it from root to tip. If you want to have something more random, then you can use the pixel vary, where you go here with a crazy color. And if you want to have a color ramp to achieve something more like that, then you can use again the UV and use a color ramp and use the dye color here. That's basically it. I hope this was helpful for you and that you can now do very nice groom shadings, and see you in the next tutorial. Bye bye.